thank you all for being here and for spending lunchtime and being part of this conversation. And also another shout out to Graham. Yes, I did have an amazing opportunity to write a book with my former professor, Dean Lidka, and some amazing other co-authors. And Graham saw a very early version of the book and slogged through it, right? And gave us lots of really good feedback, and incredibly grateful for that. Graham, wanted to give a shout out to that too. Yeah, so thanks for being here. Let's get started. I am not going to do my job well up here today if I don't leave you with something, right? Some nugget to kind of move forward with. And so this is what I'll offer to you is at the end of the day, I'd love for you to be able to think through this, right? Where might I use an experiment to move something forward, right? When I say move something forward, I mean, this is anything that you're doing to try something new, right? So this could be something that there's just friction in something that you're doing. Maybe you're running a student club and it's like, this isn't quite going as well. It's not quite getting the results I want. I feel like we're just kind of lounging around. That could be something you're moving forward. You could be moving forward a brand new idea, right? You're in the entrepreneurship hub. Maybe you have an idea for a new app or a new program or a new social venture, right? And you're kind of wondering, what should I do with that? Is it worth pursuing? Or you could be given or gifted a problem. For instance, I need to cut my budget by 25%. How do I do that, right? Got to get creative, got to come up with some new ideas for that one too. So lots of different ways can get you to the point of, I need to move something forward and I'm just not quite sure how to do that. Typically, when people face this scenario, there's two options that people see as human beings. One, do nothing. It's a great option, right? A lot of the world runs in the status quo. Just why not? I mean, you're running something now. The status quo is fine. Let's just do that, right? Seems risky. No thanks. Or it could be the opposite way, which is I'm just going all in, right? I'm going to just build that app and it's going to be amazing and people will come and it's going to be awesome. I'm just going to pivot the student club to be something totally new. I'm going to teach a new class. Everyone will show up and love it, right? So those are two options you often see. And I think experimentation to me offers you a third path. I can run small little bets and small little experiments to tell me which directions to go and ultimately shape the path that I need to move forward. That's one of the reasons I love experimentation, right? It's another alternative. And maybe I'm playing with 2 or 3 or 4 options and I need to pick out the best one. It helps me kind of, gamify it a little bit, right? Which one's going to win too. Graham went over a little bit of this. This is kind of how I came from being a wayfarer to talking to you about experimentation. My friend calls this my NASCAR slide. But the point of it is really to say a lot of these amazing places shaped my thinking a lot of things, but also shaped my thinking on experimentation too. Graham did note I was a psychology major here. I didn't take any business classes at all. And we'll explain more of that, but look at what came next. PricewaterhouseCoopers. This was the end of the 90s, if you remember it. They would swoop in, take a bunch of liberal arts kids who had never taken a business class and give you jobs. I was sold on it because people told me consulting was solving problems in teams. And actually, that's true. Super fun. And also you get to experiment a lot, right? One of the things you get to experiment is what the heck you want to do with your life, right? It's a great opportunity to kind of play around with stuff. I'm not here to promote it necessarily. IBM then came and bought our section of PwC. I was in the public sector group too, which was fantastic because around this point, I thought I wanted to be in the Foreign Service. Quite different from where I am today, which is not at all in the Foreign Service. And was lucky enough to get, after trying some traditional routes, into a project on the Afghanistan desk for 2 or 3 years and spent time in DC and in Afghanistan. Realized this was not the right fit for me for many other reasons. And perhaps it was because it was Afghanistan as my first, time abroad. And then landed at, it's time to pursue business school. I think I told you I did not step foot in, I think Tyler was a business school. At that time, the business school kids kind of scared me. I had a lot of friends in there and I would have never thought, right, as my 2,000 person self that I would be going into a business school. What was fun about it is I wanted to be an agent of social change. And if any of you are in the business school, when people ask you what you want to do, you probably have a better answer than that, right? It stops all follow-up questions, which is phenomenal for me because I got to kind of play and do whatever I wanted in that time period. And thank goodness I stumbled in my second year on innovation and design thinking. Some of y'all might have had a similar experience here or stumbling into the hub and taking a class and it really changes the way you think. Because again, I wanted to solve social problems. There was no prescription for that. I wish there was, right? No one was doing it well. No one had solved the problems I wanted to solve. So I learned that toolkit. And after working at Peer Insight, which is a venture studio, an innovation firm for 10 years, I decided to go more in-house to a startup social enterprise called Opportunity Work. I can tell you more about that in a little bit. So this path sounds pretty awesome, right? Some William and Mary. I mean, look, this is where you start, right? Sounds pretty impressive. But actually, this is kind of the behind the scenes. This is me, right? We've got level smartness over time. And you'll see there's this optimal point of curve. Hey, made pretty good, grades in high school, right? I got into William and Mary. This is really awesome. Then I should go into PwC, IBM, like at least my grandparents had heard of IBM, right? They didn't ask follow-up questions about what I was doing. See, I'm pretty smart, and I was a consultant, right? People were paying you to get the answer, right? You don't feel any smarter than that. So I'm feeling pretty awesome. Then I get to business school, which is where you would think there'd be like kind of an exponential hockey curve of smartness. You're paying a good price tag for that too, right? But it was actually there. This is 2009, 2011. That I was in business school right after the financial crisis. But more so, tech was really, really starting to set the stage, right? Amazon was in everything, just turning the point for that. And not Amazon, but all the other ones too. And so for me at UVA and probably a lot of business schools, you learn about the case method, right? So you assume the identity of, you're the CEO of Marriott, okay? And you read the packet, but this is information you have, this is the data in the back. So you might get a case like, you're the CEO of Marriott and Hilton opened up a budget brand. What do? Do you fight them? Are they in the spaces you want to be in? And then look at the data in the back and solve this problem. But what I was seeing is like, my friend just paid money to sleep on someone's couch in a room in their home, right? So if I'm Marriott, Hilton is always going to be around and always going to be something to think about. But what am I going to do about Airbnb? Am I supposed to like completely pivot my business model and start competing with them directly? Are they around to stay? Is this even a thing? This is the era that I was in, and this is where that curve stopped, right? What in the world would I do as CEO of Marriott about that, right? And I'm being looked at as a steward of people's time and money and resources, and I don't feel smart anymore. I don't feel right, and I'm used to in this curve being right? Getting the right grades, passing the test, don't fail, right? And all of a sudden you're like, I'm just not feeling really great about where things are headed for me and my ability to really drive this too. And luckily at this time, I took an innovation and design thinking class. And what it freed up for me, what I love about this personally and professionally, is it made me not have to be right anymore. It's a really liberating feeling, right? I don't know all the answers, but I know how to know them. I know how to get them too, in this world that I wanted to be in, that I was in, whether I wanted to be or not. And then if I wanted to be a social and environmental change agent, I definitely needed to know this. It was wonderful. I don't need to be right, but I need to know how to run a good experiment and listen really well. And the market, my users, my students, whoever will tell me if I'm right or wrong, right? I just have to listen. And that's one of the reasons that I just love this topic so much. These are kind of three different types of problem solving. This is a space I love to play in. I was drawn to this, right? I was less interested in the Hilton versus Marriott, which is that middle section, right, of analytical thinking. Insanely important, right? Incredibly crucial to anyone working in any sort of organization, right? But it was this right-hand side of the things that I really wanted to tackle in the world. And this was the part that entrepreneurial thinking was really helpful to me in learning how to do that, and design thinking and all the different buzzwords for this type of area. So enough about me. Let's talk about you and your failures. This is what I'd love you all to do is just get out a pen, or you can just sit there and think about it too. But just think about a time, a personal experience where you experienced failure, and that's a strong word. It could just be something that didn't go the way you wanted it to go, right? It could be something dramatic, like a failed relationship after a couple of years, or it could be, I wanted in 2003, I told myself I'd run a 5K and I did, right? So whatever the case may be, just think about it for a second, and hold on to that thought a little bit as we go through. Not to share. Everybody got something, or thinking about it a little bit about what you learned from that? Awesome. There's three things I want to talk to y'all about for a little bit. So keep that failure in there, and we'll bubble up a little bit later. Three things I want to talk about, and then we'll do some Q&A. First, why I love experimentation and why it de-risks things. Strip this all away. Another way to phrase what experiment is you're de-risking the unknown. You're de-risking the path. People like the word de-risk, right? We didn't get a good feeling about that word. The second thing is I'll tell you a case about work that we did with Nike, and experiments they ran, and why they got into it. What is that?
It's a planned emergency notification system, I think.
Oh, okay, okay. Do we need to read? Okay.
If people start running, then maybe we
Okay,
should.
that's good point. I'll take my cues from what's around me.
Yes, this is a test.
This is a test. No, that's good. We just talked about how fun tests are. The last thing is talking about the spirit of build like you're right and test like you're wrong. That's really the underpinning of experimentation. So we're talking about that a little bit too. So getting into this de-risking mindset. Remember we talked about earlier, you push to something new forward that you haven't done before. This is typically where you're sitting, right? You're thinking, I'm bringing something new into reality or new, and this could be a new way to do a meeting. It could be a new club. It could be a new class, a new program too. It means confronting uncertainty, right? Generally, it's asking yourself questions like, is anybody going to actually come? You know, if I build this, will anybody actually come or want it? How do I build it? Like, what do I actually build? What are the features of this new class? What are the features of this program? But you have about 100 questions on the right-hand side. Is this going to work? Self-doubt. It could be what your mom's still asking you or your friend when you tell them about the idea, right? What we're really thinking about, what's going on behind the scenes of these questions, is we're thinking about risk. Uncertainty is often labeled either overtly or kind of in your body as risk. And no one wants to put time and money into something that seems risky. It's just generally not how human beings are wired. So you think a little bit about the x-axis of investment and how much money and time you're spending over this y-axis. And we'll talk about how these two kind of dimensions relate to each other. But essentially, we don't want to build out anything new without de-risking it. And what I love about this, and this is what's such a pivot even for entrepreneurs, is you really are falling in love with de-risking instead of falling in love with your idea. You're trying to remain objective about this thing that you obviously really love and care about, which is hard. So if you look at this curve, these are two potential pathways where you're trying to de-risk something. And if you look across the columns, we've got research, development, execution. The research is what the heck is this thing, right? A lot of human-centered design or design thinking or customer discovery comes in that. Do people even care? What are we doing here? The development is the build stage and the execute is often the scaling phase. That line at the top is pharma, right? Go big or go home, right? We have the money. Our whole business model works on that. It's just risk all the way, right? You're kind of de-risking with trials, but it just generally that's the view. For most of us, we hit this second curve. You know, I've talked to a couple of people and they seem to like it. I'll just go ahead and build it. Like, I'll just go ahead and do it, right? Want to run my club in a different way. You know what? Like, I asked one person, they seem to like it, or I think it's cool. Let me go ahead and start building. You'll see you're still carrying a ton of risk, even though you have a higher level of investment that you're going for. And what we're really pushing toward and what experimentation helps us do is go down this nice, smooth curve where by the time you're putting in a lot of time and money, you have de-risked it by running experiments. So you're testing things like, first you're just testing, is there a need? And human-centered design and design thinking is awesome at this. Get out there and talk to people. Don't ask them if they like something. Talk to them about their needs, understand what's out there, test for that. And then you have, okay, I have a couple concept solutions that built to that need. Now I'm going to test that concept. Again, you're still not spending a ton of money, but you're starting to test out, is this solution match the problem the need that I just identified. This is my favorite spot. This is a lot of experimentation you're testing in the market. Before this, you're getting what we call a lot of say data. People saying they like it, say they want it, say they'll come if you offer that class. Yeah, definitely. Oh, yeah, I'll be there. Yeah, right. But then what you really want is do data. Do people show up? And how do you learn that before you actually offer it? There's tons of ways, and that's all what the book is about. Is how do you get particularly that do data and that behavioral data that signals that someone will change their behavior and come to the new class or come to your app for the first time or do something totally different in your student club than you thought that was possible. Now we're starting to get into scale, right? But we're getting into scale much further into the time and money too. And then we get into the commercial. Again, tons of money in these phases, but you know you've hit the right things because along the way you've really iterated and experimented your way to it. We often say this is a gap, right? This is why we wrote the book, is there's a lot, particularly when you're teaching experimentation or you're teaching design thinking innovation, there's a lot of materials about the top part that typically fall in sort of design thinking, human-centered design. And then you take any product development class or any kind of building class, and that's going to be engineering, you're going to be much more in that latter step. But this middle ground of sort of you're still figuring out what it is that you're building before you're trying to spend this type of money too. You're asking yourself, what's the least expensive and most effective way to learn if this is really helping somebody, right? Is this helping my customer? Is this helping my student? Is this really serving the right people? Okay, now we'll talk about how Nike did this and how we work with them on this. I'll set the stage a little bit and then I'll talk about the particular moment where they said, remember that path earlier, status quo, or just build it and hope they will come, which works out a lot pretty well for Nike sometimes, right? But it didn't in this case because they really thought, okay, this is a different way. What Nike's really, they're out in the world, right? They talk to their consumers a lot clearly, and they're very connected to people. And they're starting to mull around on this particular idea. How might we create a digital service that enables a better shoe purchasing experience for both 8 to 12-year-olds and their parents, right? This is something for a lot of reasons they want to get into, and this is some of the reasons why they think it's an interesting challenge and worth pursuing. So they're getting on that risk investment curve that I just showed you on, starting to say, there's something here, right? Let's test for a need here. There's enough that says, let's at least kind of start this process too. From a human challenge, does anybody ever been shopping with an 8 to 12-year-old? Or remember being it? Okay, is it super fun? Awesome. Not really, right? And remember, this is probably also set to set the stage like 2010, 2009, like less awesome online shopping. So you're dragging yourself and maybe multiple kids to Dick's Sporting Goods with the rest of the free world on a Saturday. Hope that your kid fits into a shoe that they have there and doesn't want the $400 Kobe Bryant, right? Because you're not buying that. So it's like this drama is ensuing already. This is not fun. Let's solve for that too, right? Also, young adults, which was who we call the 8 to 12-year-olds. I mean, young athletes. They change and grow quicker. They're constantly running through their shoes. And it leaves a little bit like, God, how these shoes like barely got worn, right? This is a little bit before some of the good free cycling things were. But these shoes kind of are often wasted, right? On the business side, at this point in time, and this is still the case for a lot of product, Nike's a consumer packaged good, as marketing teams would call it. They make shoes. No one's going to come in and tell them how to make a shoe better. We certainly were not there to do that, right? They wanted to get more into services, right? Better relationship with the customer. You get a lot of data on them, right? And you can learn a lot more about them if you get into more of like a subscription service or something where they're coming to you over time instead of just a point of sale on the end of a shoe and off they go, right? They and every other CPG firm is trying to get more into that space still, right? They also, Nike, because they're so big into sustainability, had spent a ton of money building equipment that would grind up shoes and turn them into basketball courts and tennis courts. Very underutilized, tons of money they spent. They wanted to use that, and they were big into sustainability. So this had to have a sustainability component. So this is what got them to the table, like, there's some stuff here that's worth pursuing, right? We're ready to do this. So we went out to test for a need. We talked, and this is very classic human-centered design, upfront customer discovery. We're both in stores, like in the upper left-hand corner, and then we're taking pictures of people's houses. I don't know if any of this looks familiar, of like the pile of old shoes in the garage or kind of shoved in the basement, right? We're starting to understand what people are doing with their old shoes and just how they're interacting, and also the dynamics between the parent and the kid, right? Then we're brainstorming. Who doesn't like a good brainstorm, right? Well, probably introverts, but when done well, you can serve everybody. But the point is, you're getting together and saying all these different possibilities come from us and doing that ethnographic research that we did. And then we picked a concept, right? We did some narrowing down based on some of those, the challenges we mentioned earlier, and we began experimenting. And the reason that they did this, what they told us was 3 years prior, because they wanted to move into services, had built a service. They had explored it for a teeny bit and spent $47 million standing up a new service. And then that's a lot of marketing money, because that's what Nike does really well, right? And it failed. So 2 years later, they have a price tag for their failure, which is $47 million. That'll get you to start thinking about another possible way, right? Now they could do the status quo of just not going to get into services, right? That was hard. And a lot of businesses do that. Tried it once, failed. We're not going to touch that again. We're going to stick with our shoes and making really good shoes, right? But they decided we're going to start doing experimentation. And they're like, we were serious about it, coming on in. And our firm in particular was good about testing services, and they knew they wanted this to be a service. So in the book, it goes through, and this is what Nike did. And so you'll see this kind of pattern come up. These are the steps of experimentation. It looks super linear. And I'm sure if you've been in this hub long enough, you get people telling you all the time, this is not a linear process, and it's not. And so that's why you have all these, the myriad of little dotted lines at the top of the saying, you're gonna circle through it. Each one of these steps is running one experiment. We ran about 12 experiments with Nike over a year and a half. And so I'll go through some of those so you can see it. But this is essentially the process. First, you're framing your idea. There, and I'll show you the kind of the concept that they landed on. You're saying, how am I gonna know if this works or not? Let's set that goalpost now, right? So I know if I'm hitting it or not. Experiment's not worth anything if you're not willing to pivot. Select what test to run, build a prototype, and off you go. I mean, it sounds pretty simple, and I'll share some examples of it with you too. This is where they landed on their concept. So what they landed on was a shoe subscription service for 8 to 12-year-olds. And if you see in here, this is one of the templates in the book. It's a concept snapshot. Sometimes people would write this in a 5-page business plan. You should be able to get to the essence of it by just jotting it down, because you're really looking at who is this for? What do they want? How does this benefit them? All in their viewpoint. And then how does this differ? Right? This is great, right? People live for this, right? I got my idea. We're all set to go. And this is where you want to go down that second path and just dive it on into the build. Because look how good this looks. You're spending time and you're really like falling in love with that as you write it down, right? And Nike was definitely doing that. And we had also tested for a need. We knew this was a problem for people, right? And so that we kind of noted down, here's what it all looks like. And then we started running experiments. So does this look expensive? No, this prototype app is free. You draw clearly the front of it and you put it out in front of people. We're starting to run an experiment on some of the assumptions about, is this a need? We're doing a storyboard that describes, because again, we're building a service. This isn't a product, right? We want to make sure people understand the whole flow of it and can really embody it. So these are examples of tests that we call cognitive walkthroughs. And the book has kind of names for the different types of tests. What I think of this is the cheapest test that you can run. You're drawing something. I mean, this is obviously somebody who knows how to draw. And you're doing a prototype that's very, very cheap. And this is at early stage, so you can work out the kinks. So we did this, learned a little bit. We're going into people's houses again to talk through it with them. Again, with just very simple prototypes. These pieces of paper are prototypes, which is essentially a way to have a conversation with somebody. Prototype's not something to fall in love with. It's just a way for like me and Olivia to have a chat, right? And I can understand more about her. Now we move into the next experiment, and these are a little bit out of order. This is what we call a lemonade stand. You can guess kind of from the name as you're getting them more out into the real world. This is my friend and former coworker, Mike. He does not work for Nike, but we were at a Nike store. Nike let us come into their store. He put on a Nike pullover. And so what we're running, the test that we're running, experiment we're running today is, look, this is a service, a shoe subscription service, where 8 to 12-year-olds get a shoe sent to them, and then they have to send their old shoe back. Right? Who in here loves the environment? Come on. And who recycles every single thing? You know, yes, Matthew. Okay, good. This is amazing, right? What we say and what we do with behaviors like recycling and the environment are often very different because we're human beings, right? And so what we really want here is due data. We just want to isolate the assumption of, will people actually send back their shoes? Are we going to build a whole test and all the things that then learn that no one's sending their shoe back? No. I mean, that's what a lot of people do, but that's not what we're doing today, right? Instead, we're going out and running an experiment. So Mike goes in, if you're just buying a pair of Nike shoes at the Nike store, we give you a return bag and say, send back your old shoes. It's prepaid. And on the side, it's, why are you sending it back? Do you care about the environment? Or are you just trying to get stuff out of your house? Or is there some third option? Please write it on the back. And then they sent them to our office, right? Because separate conversation, like Nike can't even, what was Nike gonna do? Nike headquarters, with some shoes roll up, right? They're not tracking that. We're trying to get quantitative data on like how many did we send out and how many are coming back to. So now we're waiting for these sticky shoes to come back. And what we're learning in the process is we're kind of deep, we're really exploring this idea. People are returning it, but they're returning it way later. Is that okay for the business model? We don't know, but we're just collecting the data and then we'll deal with it when we get it. People are also cramming in all kinds of other shoes to send back, like as many as they can fit in that bag and get it back because they want it out of their house. You're like, that's good due data, right? We've obviously hit a need for some people too. But one of the things we really learn in this is that, yes, people recycle. So that's great. People will send it back. It might take a while. But the other important part of it is it's not like what they wake up and love every day, right? So we've got a brand new idea. And when we think about what's really how to market it and talk about it, sustainability is not going to be the first thing that we list. Like, say the environment, come do this. It's not a big enough of a need. It's a latent need is what we learn from that experiment, but people do. So that's good, and we need that for the business model. This is also one thing I never thought, it would be possible, even when we were doing it sometimes, is you have a conversation about the business model with a customer through a piece of paper. I don't ask Graham, would you be willing to spend $100 on this service? I'm not gonna get a good, but it's leading question, and I've already anchored him to a price. You're starting to have conversation with stimulus about the business model. How many shoes would you want? How often would you want it, right? Again, you're getting say data, but you're at least talking about the business model, and then you're gonna get that due data. Now we're moving into a little bit higher fidelity. This is probably about 7 months in. We've learned enough to actually make what we call a minimal viable experience. You've heard the term MVP. We're starting to make the least offensive website that we possibly can. And notice there's no Nike branding on it. So this is also really important for a place like Nike, is they get a lot of false positives in their brand. So the reason they thought that service that cost $47 million was so great is everybody told them it was great, because they asked a lot of Nike fans, right? And so here you go. So we're like, if this thing looks like a startup and people like it, then you better believe once we put that swoosh on there, we'll be golden, right? But let's just see if there's a need. So again, so much part of the experimentation is also isolating some of the variables for it. So we make this and we enroll 30 people in it. Actually, my sister-in-law was one of the people. And you're starting to learn, what do people do with this, right? Are they going to send back their shoes? Do they sign up? We call this a trial. And this trial ran for, I think, a month and a half. We also ran what we call smoke test, which is running ads on Google to see which ones most resonate with people. Did people click on it? Did they hover on it? Which AdWords was the right combination? We're trying to get like, what does that benefit to them? Is it the environment? Is it saving time? I don't want to go to Dick's Sporting Goods, right? Dragging your kids to a shoe shop. Like, that's one value prop. We needed to really land on what would make people change their behavior. And AdWords are depending on what you're selling, not overly expensive. Definitely a lot cheaper than building this whole thing out and then learning that that's your family too. And another one we ran at the very end was going back out to people in a lemonade stand, ask them again about the business model. It seems weird to do, right? Have you ever been asked about a business model? Not really, right? But it's amazing how much information you can glean from it, because now people are rolling in and be like, how am I going to roll my whole family in this? How much am I paying? So you're starting to kind of look at some of these revenue models. So everything's on the table to be tested. This isn't just, do you want it, but also is price and everything else. And at the very end, we ran a trial that we called the initial commercial version. We rented out a warehouse. Again, Nike can't handle sums of money that are like $100,000 or less. So we had to do this kind of all off grid for them. And if y'all work at established organizations, right, sometimes it is hard to do something in the main epicenter of a big established system. So we kind of sometimes get off grid to run our experiments, and that's okay too. So we're doing this at a larger scale to test for scale at this point, so that Nike can know what to do. And then finally it launched. All those 12 experiments helped iterate and squeeze the risk and really have us understand the ins and outs of what started off as a business plan on that piece of paper, ended up quite different, but we were able to test it now and risk it too. Okay, last bit, and then we'll talk a little bit in Q&A if you have any questions about Nike or anything I've talked about today. One of the best hires I ever made was my friend David Lemus, and he was an engineer trained at University of Maryland, and this is what they taught him in engineering school: build like you're right and test like you're wrong. Not many of us get that feeling, right? You're supposed to ace the test, like build it and then do everything right? There's no wrong here, right? But this is one of the most critical elements in there. And you probably thought, if you thought about your failure earlier or the thing you might have done differently, you probably thought you were pretty bright, right? But this is one of the most interesting pieces, even from an actual being, a human being, to switch gears, right? You're really starting to fall in love with the idea. You really want it to be right. You're finding lots of validation of why it's right. And then all of a sudden you need to now turn the switch and think, how could this go wrong? Where is this going to fail? Why is this not going to work, right? It's almost like you kind of get at, like, you literally switch hats too. If you can't do it, then have a friend do it. Or think about if I was going to somebody and asking them for $1,000 for me to start my new idea, what is the one question they're going to ask me? Like, heck no, right? Unless you find these two things, right? And those are the types of things that you're understanding where you're wrong. This is my favorite part of this sort of notion of feel like you're right, testing wrong. It's a lot around assumptions and setting hypotheses. I believe this business plan is true, right? But now I need to understand where it's not. And it's my favorite step because in eighth grade, I skipped this step in eighth grade science, and I still remember it because it's weird. I don't remember much at all about eighth grade, right? But we went through the scientific process, right? Which is like the OG design thinking experimentation, right? Where this is all borrowed. It's just packaged in different ways and we're using it in a different context, which is amazing, right? So guess what I picked for my eighth grade science project? Is the Loch Ness Monster real? I don't know if any of y'all remember the time in the 90s, those Time Life books were really big, Bermuda Triangle. People were just really out there solving some of the world's like toughest mysteries. And I was all in, right? I'm like, what is going on here? My hypothesis, it's real. I mean, clearly this is what I'm going to pick. Like it is real, right? So we go to the next, and I'm so glad my eighth grade science teacher let me just flutter around on this, right? He did not stop me and be like, sure, this is a great, research topic. Because the second step I took was how am I going to collect evidence of whether this thing is real or not. Right? I live in Baton Rouge. We are very far from Scotland. And we don't, this is clearly impossible. So it was at this moment that I realized I had made a pretty bad choice. And my friends are all doing like science, explosions and melting things and all this stuff. And I'm just stuck kind of bumbling around with my bad choice. But for now, I'm now obsessed with setting a hypothesis and then figuring out how in the world you're going to test this thing, right? In the book, we have so many fun tools. And again, this is my favorite step that really help you say, look, what is your hypothesis? That one's pretty easy. That's Nike's shoe subscription service. It's going to be great. Now we're starting to immediately be like, how could, why is this such a good idea? Like for the Nike example, right? They're like, one of the assumptions we have is that people will send back their shoes. Huge assumption. So let's test it, right? How am I going to test it? What evidence do I need? We're setting that now. So we're not like, oh, cool, I got 5 shoes back. Like, is that good? Is it bad? I don't really know. I didn't set my parameters well on this too. So we have a lot of fun tools, but this is one of my favorites. And it's Assumptions Mad Lib. This is kind of give you a little flavor for the book itself. It's really meant to be a DIY. You don't need me around to do this. It's meant to democratize this so you can run experiments every part of your life, right? So this is where you just go in and start filling out your Mad Lib, right? So for Nike, for that same example, one critical assumption I have about Easy Kicks, that was the name, is that people will return their shoes. That's my assumption. They will. Great. Okay, for this to be true, I need to collect quantitative data from people sending it back to confirm that I think this is true. And then you set your targets, right? So for Nike, we wanted to see that threshold was like in those initial tests, at least half people did it. So let's just get 51%. When we scale, we want it to be more. So an aspirational target might be something more like 65 or 70%. But this is just to give you kind of a little flavor of the book is very hands-on. I mean, that's why it's spiral bound. It's meant for you to write in it too. But that's how it takes this notion of assumption and makes it kind of digestible and easier for you to play with and work through as you go through your experiments too. So just to recap before we do Q&A, experimentation helps you be good stewards of people's time and money, including your own, which is really important, right? Just do it like Nike did, right? Follow the 5 steps, run some tests. I mean, it sounds easier than it is, but try something small to work on too. And then don't skip the assumptions step, please. It's where everything kind of anchors on it too. That's more of my Loch Ness Monster learnings from there too. So go back to that, what you were thinking about earlier. As you kind of heard through this, is there an experiment that could have helped? You don't have to share. Do you wish there's something like for that 5K? Been like, you know what, let me just do a week and try and walk around the block. Let's try that out and then move into a little bit. And I mean, you already see probably experiments that you're running in your life, but you're not even calling it that. Or other people are running it for you, like fitness app might be saying, hey, get your butt moving a little bit more each day and you'll get there. So the reviews are in for the book. That's a scan that you can look to buy it. There's also, if you want to experiment with the experimentation book, to get a preview. You like it? Great. You don't like it? That's fine too. You also can, the QR code, sign up for the educators packet too, and we'll send out a lot of the materials and the templates, that sort of thing. Graham gave an amazing review, which thank you so much. And then so did our 10-year-old daughter. Right? This is the day that I got the book, and Tim's, he's not here anymore, but he's like, this is so cool. Like, Mom wrote a book. No, which is, she's auditioning to be a teenager. That's what we thought. She's doing a great job too. And I'll leave that up in case you want to scan it, or you can come grab me later too. Any
By the way,
questions?
we're gonna do a book giveaway.
Oh, okay.
So don't forget to check in using that QR code. And our team will do a random drawing from those check-ins at the end of the session, and you'll get one of those copies that you gave me.
Awesome. Perfect. That's exactly what I was hoping. What questions do you have? Where are you like, this is not happening? Yeah.
Did that Nike thing like kind of pick up? Cause like, maybe I'm just like in the blue, but I've never heard of it.
No, and this is a great question. This is not often something I share on the slide. So when you're doing, if you've ever worked inside of, anybody in here worked inside a large organization? Like, very, yep, right. That was going up against probably 12 other experiments, 12 other concepts at the same time. It ran for 3 years and only made, I think, $80 million, so they shut it down. It's not big enough for Nike. This is where we're, I mean, this is why it's so amazing to think about Nike as a potential, right? They had lost the 47 million. That was enough to get them to the table to try something new. But they, I mean, you know, they're really good about running lots of different. Now, a lot of the other things were not services, they were products like new shoes, and they actually do a lot of really fast materials based experimentation. That's where they kind of more landed on. It's like we want to be more around maybe making a shoe. Like they went more the direction of making a shoe that's entirely sustainable, things like that. So they dropped this 3 years in too, which is kind of the not fun part of experimentation here. People are doing it all the time. Yeah.
So was there a lot of negative feedback when they dropped it? Did people complain?
No, they didn't make, no, and unlike a lot of places, they just stopped it. They didn't, you just could go to you went to the site and it wasn't there type of thing. It's like, okay, we should, you know, they said, I think they said something about it, or like try some of our other, you know, new shoes that are here too, but it wasn't a big fanfare about it. I think to some extent, that's the ultimate experimenter, right? There, I mean, even if this thing makes money that would be exciting for you, if it doesn't make the, you know, the scalable amount that they need, they will get shut down for maybe just another shoe that can still make a lot more money than a service too. Yeah, so they, I mean, this was like no big deal to them, you know, and I think this was also kind of interesting about, like, no one in the news heard about the $47 million service, you know, that failed. That was out for a while, right? And then got shut down pretty quickly too. You don't often hear about that, but there's some really interesting stories of corporate ventures that have failed. They just really don't like talking about it, which is one of the reasons we can do this case, is because it's so far out for when all, like this was 2013, 2014, when this was all happening. So it's far enough out where they're not embarrassed to talk about it. Yeah.
When you're in your, experimentation process, and let's say your conclusion is, you invalidated some of your assumptions that were core to your concept. Can you talk a little bit about how you kind of come back from that, maybe work with the original concept, but continue forward?
Yeah, I think a lot of times you'll have optionality. So you might go in, usually you're designing an experiment where it's not like the whole thing is good or bad. You might find a piece that's not. We work with ARP a lot, and then one of the assumptions they had, I forgot which product it was or which experience it was. They thought that the population that they serve of the elder generation didn't want to text. And so they're like, oh, we're going to call, like, I think they were going to email people about something. And we ran a split test to see which one, right? So you're often getting, and text was like by far, hands down, the right one. So it was usually less about like, you're kind of designing lots of little small tests where it's sort of like the idea is still there, but you're kind of figuring out different ways to make it work. Like a little simple feature as a communication channel, which can really make or break it. I mean, if you're just sending out all these emails and no one's responding, you're like, this sucks. Maybe it's not a good idea. But if you isolate that variable, you know that it is a good idea. They just don't want to check their email, or it's getting buried. That's a good question. Yeah.
There's a question here. Give me a second.
Yeah.
So I'm really curious, as you think about moving down that curve, one of the classic things that happens at William Mary, you start at the very beginning of like proof of need.
Yeah.
And when you're in the proof of need phase, like you can also discover that you've proven your need and that others are also attaching additional needs. And so playing out the Nike idea, right? Like,
Yeah.
I have a 10-year-old son. We didn't play a lot of field sports, but I've never bought him a new pair of cleats because in kids' shoes, cleats are the least used. And it was like, he's got all eBay cleats. Like that's where they came from.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so you might have discovered an additional need running down this Nike experiment where you go, you know what, we're actually getting some fairly high quality shoes back.
Yeah,
that you could then theoretically add here's a human good that we could theoretically be taking fairly high quality shoes out of this population, sharing them with others. So you've got environmental and a human good. But one of the beauties of your plan is it's like, nope, here's what we're focused on is like this piece. So when you think about the totality of that experimental curve,
yeah,
how do you think about honing focus versus when you might be open to, oh, like we could actually solve more than one need, even if it distracts from our original purpose?
yeah, and that's what's amazing about if you're an organization, you're running lots of different experiments, almost like portfolio of things. You should be gathering like these sort of side needs all the time, right, as you go, right? As you're doing experiments, you're learning things about people that you didn't even set out to test. And sort of pocketing those and looking across and be like, wow, that's a really, I can't think of an example of when that has happened. I mean, other than like, I think actually that's how Slack formed, is that it was serving some other need. I forgot what it was, but it was realizing people were using it for something else. So they completely pivoted and dropped this other thing. That seemed like a good idea, right? But I think having a place to kind of hold and harness the stuff that you learn that may invalidate your actual hypothesis. I mean, it may not be relevant enough to actually move that particular experiment, but that's just a ton of little buckets of needs that you're holding on to. We're doing that at work right now, where we're saying, a sales call is an experiment, right? Somebody's gonna see, your job is to run it as an experiment where you're not talking too much. I mean, if you're, depending on what you're selling, right? And you're listening more, but that bucket of needs that you're getting from that sales call can be helpful in a lot of different parts of your business. But what's interesting is the discipline of like, for Nike, it usually when you have an idea, it has multiple benefits to people. But your job, I mean, as human beings, it's really hard to change behavior. So like, you're right, that discipline of saying, that's why we ran all those ad tests. And that was purely on the 4 different main benefits of that product. We wanted to get it down to 1. We wanted to really understand, all that stuff is great. And it's great if it has multiple ones, but there needs to be one kind of most salient reason of why someone's going to stop doing what they do now, which is go to Dick's and buy a bunch of shoes, and then switch, try some kind of brand new shoe subscription service. Yeah, the discipline is really hard in experimentation.
And in fairness, cleats we bought used.
Yeah.
Sneakers we mostly get rid of when we're so embarrassed that he's still wearing them that we literally take them off his feet and don't want anything other than a grinder to see them.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because if any of you are on Facebook with the buy nothing, like this is basically solving this sort of decluttering challenge. I mean, there's now lots of other things that are kind of like, they're still solving that declutter need, but in a completely different way, which is interesting. Yeah, I agree.
Could you pull up the non-linear process?
Yeah.
When you think about teams of people attempting to use this, is there a place that people tend to fall down or it stretches them and they need more support to do that activity?
Mhm. That's a good question. I think a lot of times people still, when they're selecting your test, they still want it to be a bigger deal than it needs to be. They're kind of like, this needs to be a very grandiose test, or it needs to always be a trial. Like I need to kind of, and a lot of times it can be something, I mean, like just as simple as showing up and handing out the bags too. There's so much you can learn from, even if you just have a few days, no money, right? And so sometimes I think you get that push and pull of like, this needs to be grandiose. The other thing where people get stuck a lot is trying to test too many variables at one time, right? So I have like, I have just a week and I need to run the test, and I'm hoping it gives me the feedback for all 6 things that I'm trying to test. That's real, and that's human nature too. And especially on a team, because everybody's going to have a different thing that they think is the right thing to do, or they think is but oftentimes and y'all hear this a lot, of constraints being a gift, right? That can be a gift, right? It's like you have a team of people and you only have 1 week, or you tell yourself, if I had to run a trial for a test that's just $50, what would I do? So even if you don't have constraint, Nike didn't have constraints, right? And especially not on a price tag, right? So, but like you can make them artificially for yourself if you have a blessing of riches. And sometimes too, that'll help your team kind of narrow it down. And that's what some of the things that's hard about this is doing as a team. But a lot of the templates in the book are a lot about, hey, go diverge your thinking. And then this is a tool to help you kind of narrow down on that one thing to move to the next step. Do you find a particular spot where people are?
That I've seen the
Yeah.
problem that you described with entrepreneurs a lot.
Mhm.
They want to build their venture, to test their venture.
Yeah.
instead of the
Well,
underlying assumptions. I think also around being able to articulate what a successful outcome is, like what's the evidence that you're looking for?
mhm.
Because entrepreneurs are very optimistic.
Yeah.
And then every experiment is successful if they don't really properly do that test. That's something that I see as well.
Yeah, that's a classic of like just seeing what you want to see in the data. That's also why it helps to have two people and potentially one, you know, Jean Licca, who I got to write the book with, she has some characters she calls Jeff and George, and it's a fixed versus growth mindset of Carol Dweck. And she's actually really advocates for having sort of a naysayer partnered up with it too. So find that friend who's like, you know, I'm gonna be an accountant, like I know my future, you know, and pair up with them and so they can say, and basically just continue to ask them, what do you think could go wrong here? Or like, if I asked you for money, why would you not give it to me? What are the three things you would want to know before I gave you that money? Is another way to do that. But you bring up 2 points that I think is really helpful. One, people to highlight. One is I think there's like, when am I done with this hamster wheel of experimentations, right? Now, a lot of times we have the constraint of time. You have a semester, gotta get this thing done in that time too. And do I know that I'm done? Am I really ready? Like how, you know, there's some people who are just like, can't de-risk it enough. I'm just gonna squeeze, you know, as much as I can out of some of these experiments as I go too. But most of the time we have the constraint of time, which is also really helpful too. But and sometimes, particularly with customers, we will show up and we have a result they don't want to see. Right, and like, oh, this is not really what I wanted. And depending on what it is, there's usually some alternatives that have popped up too, which is nice. You want to get those early, yeah.
This feels to me sort of like improvising and seeing what happens, but what would the main difference between that and just this more concrete experimentation be?
That's a really good question, because part of me is like, I don't want this to be overly fussy, you know, it's like, just do, like, anything's better than nothing, right? And just go out and like hand out flyers and see if anybody, you know, it reacts to the thing. And there's a lot of just simple ways that you can, it's more improvise of like, hey, I have to run an experiment today, what would it look like versus like, I'm gonna hem and haw and like go through all the templates too. There's that as well, right? But some of it's just getting to the, like, you could probably go through this whole process in a day too, if you wanted to. And I think that's what's nice about the book is you can kind of go in and see how formal do you want to make it too, and look to see. But even just even trying something out is still a step to me in the entrepreneurial direction, than rather than just be like, I'm gonna build it, right? Like if that's what you mean by improvising is like, you know, I'm just gonna run this test real quick, or this, you know, and try this out. It's better than nothing, right? Just write down the assumption that you're testing in it, and then maybe a little notepad of like how many people showed up or whatever the case may be. We do that all the time. We experiment when we're dating, we experiment with all kinds of stuff.
At what point in this process, when you were going through it, was branding or the naming of the project discussed? And how much failure and change went on around that?
The branding piece.
The branding piece.
The great thing is that we didn't have to stick around for that. We're not good at that. And so we're like, call it whatever you want, Nike. I mean, we're just making up names for it, but we started as just a startup. So we're just zero branding. We just called it Easy Kicks. That usually comes more in the scale and commercialization. And that's kind of where we would back out. And kind of, I'd say more traditional experimentation product that fall more in the product development realm of scale.
Outside your scope.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a cop out, but usually we were just like, what the heck is this thing? Regardless of what its name is. I don't know if we had a time where the naming of it kind of influenced the testing. I don't think so. Other than like taking Nike's brand totally off of it. It was really essential for us to test. Well, yeah, that's a good question. You may have an experiment that, yeah.
Would you go back to your risk investment curve?
Yeah. Love that thing.
You do this all the time. So I'm guessing that with your professional expertise, you could be testing for a need, but you sort of have the idea of, hey, here's how the sequential blocks could go to getting all the way down to commercializing.
Mhm.
If you're not as experienced as you are in sort of running experiments like that, how much do you think about sort of the things that are gonna come, or again, like you just said, just do it, right? Like to the first one, but how do you think about that as far as how you scale the levels of experiments you're gonna run?
Yeah, it's a good, I like that question because I think one of the things that I didn't really touch on that much is like, you're not ever, sometimes you might be doing this all by yourself. I mean, if you're just, Natalie and I want to start a new venture on my own, right? Some point you're gonna either need money and what we love to do is do it, experiment inside a big organization. So what's great is that the people around you who are probably more risky than you will give you, some of that framing and structure that you need to go down this curve. So I might have something where Olivia's like, that sounds great, right? You want to try that new class. It needs to have this many students in 2 years or else it's be a drop. Thank you. Thank you for the gift of some goalposts. And so I know that as I'm going through it, I'm starting to have an understanding of like what success looks like or what, rather than if you're your own person, you might struggle with that. You don't really know what success looks like or kind of having that down there. So I think sometimes people think of other collaborators like naysayers but sometimes those people will give you the gift of kind of letting you know what the end is supposed to look like or how much time you have to get through these things too. And honestly, bringing them in at each little point too also helps you kind of shape your question of like, how do I know if I'm moving down the right spot or if this is as far as I can go? And I do have to make some kind of a leap forward too. So relying on other people can really help frame it, so you don't feel like, oh, I don't know the answer. I don't know what to do. To engage other people in it to help you kind of set up some of these lily pads, if you will. And then at each point, talk to them and say, hey, here's what I'm learning. Like, bring other people in. And that's what's also nice is you don't have to bring your own personal judgment into this. You're showing the data and you can say, what do you think? Like, I think this data says that it validates my hypothesis. What do you think? Too. And that also creates buy-in and might get you more time and money to keep moving down the curve. Too, yeah.
Can I add something to that and see if you agree with it?
Yeah.
I think some of the answer to Jeremy's question relates to the tolerance for ambiguity that we talk about a lot,
Yeah.
where there's a similar curve, which is unknowns. So we're moving down the chain of unknowns. But the reality is at the beginning of testing for a need, we don't know what the concept is. And for a team to be comfortable using this process, they have to be comfortable with, I don't know what we're going to test yet. That is sometimes a difficult thing in these kinds of environments.
Yeah. Yeah.
The expectation is that you already know what the thing is when the answer is, I have no clue, and that's okay.
Yes. All the above. And now that I've moved into more of the social sector and nonprofit space, it's worse, right? It's like, you're going to get a grant or you're going to try and get funding. How has this worked 1,000 times before? I'm not paying you to experiment, right? This need it's just wild to me how the space is supposed to be, that you would think would be more right because no one solved it. You need proof points before you even engage. And some of academics is sort of similar too. And I think that's one of the most challenging pieces. But that's where you start to what we try and do is kind of have people shift towards falling in love with the problem instead of falling in love with the solution. And kind of understanding that you might sort of more so be like, even in my job now, right? We're trying to rewire the labor market to support people who don't have a bachelor's degree, right? We'll always need a bachelor's degree. We'll always need college to fuel our economy, but we're locking out 50% of the workers, right? That's a problem to fall in love with, right? And so in our organization, we basically have a portfolio of different things that we think are hitting that needle. So we're trying to, and that's really difficult because once we kind of have an idea for something, people start to fall in love with that, particularly as a funder also falls in love with it, right? You're trying to say, hey, I'm still trying to be agnostic to always, I'm trying to see if this is solving the problem. And the second it doesn't, it's off too. But that takes a real, that takes a real discipline, I'd say, particularly when you're getting a lot of other, as you just articulated. Yeah.
I think that's
Oh, yeah, it's time. Yeah. So there you go. Dude, thank you.
Thank you.